everyone, to the Unraveled and Rising podcast. And I'm so excited to introduce today's guest. I'm Terry, one of your co-hosts, and my lovely co-host, Michelle.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah, Kimberly had a appointment today, so she couldn't be with us, and we greatly miss her. But I am so excited for our guest today, everyone. Her name is Mandy, and I just love her because she was such a inspiration in my own journey. We've talked a lot about our own personal journeys here on this podcast. And when I was going through my own divorce and realizing that I was struggling with codependency, and we talked about that on here, like just putting a name to codependency and people pleasing and all of the things, anxiety, depression, panic attacks. And I didn't know how I was going to get through divorce. I just felt so defeated. I was confused. I didn't know who I was, just lacking identity and direction. And how was I ever going to get through this? And through our church, we go to the same church together, Red Rocks Church. And I found the recovery group, and testimony night at Recover, she shared her testimony. And I just saw a woman of great courage, resilience, and overcoming. And I knew within me, there was just a knowing in me that if she could get through what she had just faced in her life, I could get through it. And so we talked so much on this podcast about community and not having to do it alone. And this is a story of and proof of that, because her story, I grabbed onto that testimony and her story, and just felt like I had hope and courage. And I knew that if she could get through what she had just overcome in her life, that I could get through it. I didn't know how, but I knew that I had the people in that room, and I knew that I had proof that it was possible. And so Mandy, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me today.
We're very happy. And I think too, what it speaks to is the fact that when you hear testimony like that, and this is why sharing stories is so important, yes, it makes you feel not alone. It makes you feel like you have a support system or people around you that have experienced trauma and similar things, and you can relate to it, and it helps you grow and thrive as well. So that's why your story, Mandy, is so important. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, of course. I think that stories just they're healing for us to be able to tell, but they're also so impactful for other people to hear. And I remember that first night that I told my story and you were there. And I think what a lot of people didn't see is how I was panicking. Like I was absolutely panicking. I was on stage with a microphone. It was my first time sharing my story. And I remember telling my husband, if I pass out on stage, you just fireman carry me out of here. And so I think that was the part that a lot of people didn't see was on stage, you just see this confidence, but you don't know like what's really going into that. And there's so much fear, especially when you're sharing a story that can be so very heavy.
Yeah. Yep.
100%. So on this podcast, Mandy, we talk a lot about kind of unraveling and rising. So the things that the trauma and the things that, pretty much I think Terry says everybody has, and then how we've kind of, rise beyond it. So I don't know how you want to start your story, or if Terry, if you have a question or anything that you want to have her start, but can you just tell us a little bit about maybe your story and what you share on stage, and so we can understand a little bit more about you, and then we'll probably have questions along the way, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Feel free to stop me and ask me any questions. So I'm from the South originally. So I'm from Texas and South Florida, and I kind of bounced back and forth as a child. My parents divorced when I was 2. And so I spent a lot of time flying back and forth between Florida and Texas. And I would say as a kid, I was always very empathetic. I was always very in tune emotionally. But I grew up in an era where it was perceived that I was kind of a problem child. Like, oh, she's just so dramatic. She's throwing temper tantrums. She's this, she's that. And so I just kind of always had this sense that nobody really wanted to deal with my emotions. And so I very quickly learned how to suppress my emotions. And like, oh, okay, it's not acceptable to cry. I mean, I actually had a a father who was ex-military. And he used to always say, crying doesn't solve anything. And so it was that suppression of like, okay, just keep it all together. Let's control it. Let's perfect it. Right. And so I went through a good chunk of my childhood just trying to be this perfect kid and box up all of my emotions. And so I think by the time I became a teenager, that really started to unravel and explode. I went from, kind of color coordinating my closet, so my room was always clean, to just kind of going off the deep end. Now I'm drinking, I'm partying, I'm smoking, I'm self-harming, I'm breaking curfew, I'm doing all the things, like super rebellious teenager. And I think it really stemmed from being in this place of trying to be perfect for so long that I just could no longer mask it. And so I really just started to break out of that. And ultimately, I ended up getting pregnant at 16. And so being a teenager, having a baby, I did not have a great support system for that. My mom she was very kind, and she was very timid. And my father was the opposite. He was very emotionally abusive, explosive. And so I had like these two opposite extremes in separate households. And so I think there was just also this piece of where I had a hard time navigating boundaries because I didn't know what extreme I was going to get. And so I'm walking through my pregnancy at 16 years old, and my mom was so adamant that she wanted me to have an abortion. And everything in me was just knew that was not a decision that I could live with. And so I ultimately decided to keep my baby. He actually just turned 18 this last November. And so we'll get to that. But it was such a rough ride, but there was so much rejection from my parents and so much abandonment from my parents during that time. And I was already in a tailspin and not getting the support that I needed. And so at 17, I met another guy. I got pregnant again. And this relationship actually ended up being a very severe domestic violence relationship. And when I was about 6 months pregnant, he attempted to throw me down a flight of stairs, and I actually lost my child. And that was by far, with all the trauma I have, one of the hardest things that I've ever had to walk through. To be 17 years old, already have a 1-year-old, and I just lost a baby. The grief from that was unimaginable, and it sent me running. And when I say running, it was straight to alcohol. That was my go-to. And so I started drinking more heavily than I had ever been in my entire life. I started partying, getting mixed in with the wrong crowds. And around this time, at 18, as I'm running from this grief, I met this other guy. I was really great at meeting guys at this age. And he, he was so charming, and he said and he did everything right. And he lived a few hours away from where I lived in Texas. And we actually spoke long distance on the phone for about 6 months. And he did and said everything right that gained my trust. And after those 6 months, I decided to go live with him in Houston. And so when I got to Houston with him, everything flipped. And all of a sudden, I am in a situation that I cannot get out of. And this person is not who I thought that they were. And that night, I was put in a strip club and given very strict rules and guidelines to follow. Because this guy actually was a pimp. He was a trafficker. And I had fallen into that trap. And so then for the next 6 years, I was trafficked across the southern states with different traffickers, with different women. I was emotionally, psychologically, sexually, physically abused for those 6 years. This really created an environment where my alcoholism and my drug use just spiraled out of control. I was absolutely a wreck. And I was just really trying to numb one traumatic instance after another, because every day you're surviving trauma when you're being human trafficked. And so every day I'm trying to keep up the substances so I don't have to feel what's actually happening to me emotionally, physically, sexually. And so there's this piece where my brain was just trying so hard to check out, because I didn't know how to physically get out of the situation, but I knew how to mentally get out of the situation. And that was with alcohol and drugs. And so that situation for 6 long years, and you think about statistically, trafficking survivors only, their lifespan is about 6 to 8 years. And in that time, women usually overdose, they're murdered, or they commit suicide. And so the lifespan of somebody who's involved in trafficking is usually not very long. And so at those end of those 6 years, I actually was 24 years old, and I ended up in active liver failure. So I had 5 teams of medical doctors come in and tell me that I was dying. And so I had so much of just like, God, what is my life? And how did it get to this? And how could I go out like this? And the situation had just reached a point of like, no return. And so I remember sitting in the ICU and just saying, God, if you're there, I don't want my life to end like this. It has been nothing but chaos. And if you're there, I need you. And I remember that night being in the ICU, and there was a Joel Osteen sermon that actually came on the TV at 2 a.m. And I have no idea what the sermon was. I have no recollection, but I just remember having like this glimmer of hope of like, God hears me. He knows. Mm-hmm. And so, they came in, they tried one more thing to save my life, and they were successful. And so I hit the ground running, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to drink anymore. I'm not going to do drugs anymore. I'm going to stay away from all of those people. And within 90 days, of course, I relapsed because I didn't have community, and I didn't have support. And I was so stubborn and strong-willed. And I really just like did not want to tell anyone what I had been through. And so I just was under this impression that I could keep it to myself. And so after that last relapse, I went back into the hospital, I detoxed, and, I remember this was a military hospital, and I remember one of them asking me, like, you were just here for liver failure like a few months ago. What are you doing? And I remember for the first time it clicked in my brain of like, oh, I'm an alcoholic. Like, I actually don't know how to stop drinking. This is what I have done to survive for the last 6 years. And when that realization hit me, that was kind of the unraveling of all kinds of things. And the truth was starting to really fall out. So I got sober. I hit 120 meetings in 90 days because I was so scared of myself. I was so scared of other people, but I felt safe in the rooms of recovery. I felt safe with other people that were also trying to recover. And so that was where I stuck in the middle of the herd and did my best to just continue showing up. And through my recovery, I've experienced so much. My mom passed away when I was 18 months sober, and that almost broke my recovery very early on. And because we had finally repaired our relationship. And so it was like once we repaired it, and then she was gone. And so there was a wrestling that happened with God. But I made the decision to keep going. And so then the Lord brought me to Colorado, and I felt like I just needed to be somewhere new and have a fresh start. I met my husband. We blended our families. We had a daughter. And now today I'm 10 and a half years sober and free from human trafficking. I have 2 psychology degrees. I own my own business called the Refinery for Change. And I'm also the program director for Safe Places for Women. And so recovery has been such a gift in my life, but it's also my faith and trusting that I'm letting God lead in my recovery. And so there is so much that we can do to heal from our trauma and the things that we've had to overcome. And I've had to go through years of EMDR trauma therapy to kind of go through all the things piece by piece and to rewrite my belief systems. And that is such a hard process for any survivor to go through. But on the other side of that, life is truly beautiful and it's such a gift. And I'm so thankful to still be here today and to be able to inform people what human trafficking is like and what it does.
Yeah. You said a few things that I was taking some notes here. So early on, and you know, I serve women at the Denver Women's Correctional Facility. I think you know that. And I do a trauma recovery program. And what we do talk about is these early childhood years and how we really rely on our primary caregivers. Mm-hmm. And that is where our trust is. And early on, when we are not seen and heard, and when we're told you're too emotional, we go inward, and we're forced to go inward. We can't just leave. And so we're not seen and heard. And so these are those times that we dissociate and we go inside, right? And we don't allow our voices to be heard. So this is where those behaviors come, right? Mm-hmm. You said that, and they showed up in alcohol and the behaviors of dressing wildly. So again, going back to that being trauma informed, what are the behaviors telling me, right? And I mean, in any profession we're in, if there's behaviors going on, whether it be anger or just things in somebody ghosting me, or am I having issues with an employee, anything that it can be in, there might be some deeper things going on. You said shame. I heard you talk about shame, where I just couldn't face who I was. I didn't want to tell people some of the things that I did. And so that is a big thing with helping people struggling with moving forward. So you also mentioned community and why it's so important. We tell people here on the podcast, finding those safe people that you can trust and where you're not going to feel judged, and you can find people that have also been through the same things that you have been through, where you can let those that weight that you've been carrying and that shame come out and not be judged for that is so important. And then the other thing I heard you say is EMDR, which is another thing that we've talked about on here. And these are those somatic practices that we've talked about, because EMDR was part of my journey as well. And we talk about that renewing of the mind and changing our mind, and that our brain being malleable and be able to rewrite our stories and reprogram and have those new neural pathways. And that this EMDR is such a great way to rewrite new programs, and it takes work. So Mandy, I would love for you to just hit on how recovery is still an ongoing process for you. Like you've gotten to the other side, but what is walking this path still look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Terry. And I think all of what you said, yes, it's so important. When we've experienced trauma in our life, we have to figure out what works for us and how are we going to overcome it. And what works for one person might not necessarily work the same for another person. And so it did take a while for me to get into my groove and figure out, like, okay, this is working, this isn't working, and kind of the right combination, right? And so we're such unique individuals, and our brains are so special and powerful. And so really figuring out for each person what that looks like. And so for me, it's still attending regular recovery meetings. I have done years of 12-step meetings. I've done 12-step meetings my whole recovery. And I love 12-step meetings. I think there's something so special about them. But I did hit a point in my recovery where for me personally, I needed something more Christ-centered. I needed to dig into my faith a little bit more, because I ultimately felt like I was going to have more healing and freedom there. And so Christ-centered recovery groups have been very, very strong in my recovery. And so I still attend recovery groups on a regular basis. I still attend church on Sundays every weekend with my family. I still go to therapy. And so I do therapy. In some seasons, I'm doing it weekly. In some seasons, I'm doing it bi-weekly. There have been times where I've taken, month-long breaks from it. But ultimately, that's the combination for me, is church, therapy, recovery meetings. And these are the things that I stay plugged into. And then outside of those things, I still have a very strong community of people that call and check on me, that pray for me, that I know I can call and trust if I'm having a meltdown. There's people, I can be very strong-willed, as I mentioned earlier. Since I was a little girl, I've always been strong-willed. And so I have those friends that are willing to be honest with me and say, Mandy, no, and so I'm very grateful for those friendships, because I don't want a friend that's going to come alongside me in my recovery and tell me that I'm doing everything right when I'm in the wrong.
Yes, 100%.
And so that's the piece of community and recovery. I need strong people to be able to correct me when I'm wrong, and to tell me when I'm not doing my best. And so that's such a huge piece of my recovery as well. And there's been so many people that have shown up for me in that way. And so those are some of the things that have worked for me in my recovery. And it's not an easy journey. It is so hard. And there's also recovery fatigue, where every few years you get this feeling of, gosh, I've been doing this for so long, and I wish I was here, or I wish I was there. And why do I have to do all this work? And normal people who have never had trauma have, they don't have to do the kind of work that I have to do. And so there is like this recovery fatigue that happens throughout the years. And so having that community is what helps carry you through those moments.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Michelle,
I was going to say too, the thing that immediately came out when you started speaking to me was, being emotional and being shamed for that. Because I have that exact same experience as a child. And I was a very emotional child, and I thought something was wrong with me. And even my early 20s, going through therapy in my early 20s, I had some men that were in my therapy group told me that I shouldn't be crying in the group. And I said, okay, so I learned as well, just like you, that you cannot cry in front of people because people don't like that emotion. I also had a female mentor back in the day who told me that you can't show emotion in front of males at work because it makes you look unstable. So you had to, you couldn't show emotion, that no emotion, because it looks like men don't like it. And I just thought, God, so it took me years. I mean, I'm in my 50s now, and I think I've just gotten more comfortable with crying in front of people like in the last year. Like it's been a long journey for me.
Which is crazy because we are emotional beings.
Yes. But it was a shameful thing. So I never felt comfortable expressing it. But I just have such a connection to that. So thank you for sharing that, because that kind of started your journey of where I want to be heard and seen, like Terry said. So I had the similar experience with men in my teenage years, where I just wanted to find a connection with someone, and a man was that connection for me. And so you find these bonds with men that aren't good for you, which I did plenty of, because I was looking for a connection.
Yeah. And I think specifically, like, too, if the connection is broken with that paternal figure in your life, and that, like, having a healthy male figure that can model emotion, that changes the brain. And if we didn't have that growing up, then we have no idea that is appropriate. And so I think there was just this piece, like you said, of shame, of just like shutting down every time I felt emotions, or I'm not allowed to show that. And so I think for me, a lot of the ways that it came out, it was anger. Like I was very feisty, and I was ready to argue. I was ready to fight. I was very defensive. And so these are like old behaviors that carried me throughout my life. But then even as an adult in recovery, sometimes those behaviors still pop back up. And I have to ask myself, like, am I giving myself permission to cry? If I'm angry, then I'm asking myself, what am I afraid of? What's underneath that? And, it's that constant checking of motivations. And I had a therapist tell me, Mandy, you have to give yourself permission to cry. And that has carried me, because I can't tell you how many times I'm locked up in anger, and and then it pops in my head, like, are you giving yourself permission to cry? And really am I allowing myself to feel? Or am I going back to that old survival technique of locking it all up? And so that is a big piece of it too, that is still ongoing 10 years into my recovery, is how I'm feeling my emotions and how they're showing up.
Well, and then I think that for everyone, just having that grace for ourselves, because we are such programmed beings that we operate in patterns and programs, and just realizing that, having the awareness that I'm just back in the program, and it's okay. Like I've just operated this way for so long, and I'm just back there, and it's okay to just reset and start back over. and just noticing and getting right back on the path and just having some grace for ourselves. I have to do that all the time and going, and I always pay attention to the way I'm feeling, because it's always this not so good feeling, and my heart rate kind of goes up, and that's an assignment I have the women focusing on this week, and writing down, when do you notice your heart rate going up, even if it's just a little. And in that moment, what are you thinking in that moment? What's happening in your body? And then just notice, is this something that I've thought in the past? Like, am I in the present moment, or am I thinking of something that's happened in the past?
Yes.
And then most of the time it's something that's happened in the past, and it's not happening in the present, and just, and finding where I am in the moment. And then also allowing grace, right? I always go back to grace, and just, I'm going to show permission, like you just said, allowing myself permission to just have grace for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that grace is such a huge piece. And as I've gone through, I finished my bachelor's program and got my psychology and recovery and addictions. And then I went on to do my master's in addictions counseling. And as I was going through this process, there was such a learning of how to give myself grace, because there were so many times where I was so hard on myself of like, I want to do this perfectly, and I want to do this well, and I want to serve women in our community. And there was this pressure of like, I need to be perfect to do that. And there was such a huge battle with that over the last few years. It actually kind of like triggered some of my panic attacks to resurface. And what it was it was going back to that childhood of like, you have to be perfect. You have to control the situation. You have to, and so there was a huge piece of grace that had to happen for me to be able to let that go and step into my calling, and recognize that, hey, I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to control the situation. I just have to show up how I am. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And I still work on that, Mandy. So there's this thing that, just God has to remind me to, Terry, just take a step. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I still think sometimes that I still have to show up perfect, but this goes back to that. I mean, I kind of talked through my own thoughts this Sunday at the prison, and it's a worth issue. Mm-hmm. And just talking through my own worth issue in the whole trauma loop, and the belief that I'm believing, and how it shows up in my perfectionism and my people pleasing, and then the results I'm getting because of the actions I'm taking, and how it's showing up in my life. Yeah. And so it's a constant reminding for me as well that, okay, how am I showing up right now? And sometimes I'm doing the same thing. So it's constant work.
100%. I want to talk a little bit about kind of misconceptions and how people can recognize maybe signs of sex trafficking, because I have heard, and I think people have a misconception that of the level of control, because I think they're thinking in their minds, which I've heard before, people say online and other places, why don't they just leave? Why don't they just go? Why don't they just go to the authorities? Why don't they just get out? And I don't think they have an understanding of how much control is there where you couldn't get out, or, could you just describe that so people understand that how hard it is to get out of that?
Great question.
Sure. That's a great question. I think what a lot of people don't understand is that there is a level of psychological brainwashing and coercion that happens. And so like, you even think about a woman in a domestic violence situation, I think it's 7 to 9 times it takes before she actually successfully leaves or is killed by her partner. And so human trafficking is no different. You are under that same level of brainwashing and coercion. You believe that this person, you're told repeatedly that I'm the only person that cares for you. Nobody else will ever love you because of what you do. I'm the only one who's here for you. There is an isolation where they separate you. You think about my first trafficker, when I talk about it, he moved me hours away from the city that I lived in with my family. And he knew where I lived. He knew who my parents were. And so there was always this intimidation factor of like, we don't talk about this. I know where you're at. And I flew home every single month. Every month I went home, I visited my family. It's not that I didn't see my family. I saw them all the time. But there was this piece of control that was happening that people did not see. And I knew better than to talk about it. I knew that I had to protect my family, and that was my number one priority. So I never said a word to anybody that any of this was happening. My mom believed that I waitressed at nightclubs, and I was happy with letting her believe that, because the truth was so much more horrifying. And so there was this level of I needed to spare my mom from what was actually going, but then there was also this level of I'm protecting her from these people. And so there's also a piece of it where your identity is so suppressed. And so when I first got there, they take your ID, they take your birth certificate, they take your social. They say, like, we're holding on to this for safekeeping and putting it in whatever, like a safe, you know, and then you're given a name that you work by. And so I actually went by a different name for those 6 years. And so by the time I got out, I didn't really even know who Mandy was. There was a whole piece of identity that had to be rediscovered. And so you lose yourself, you lose your identity, you lose your free will, you lose your autonomy, your ability to make choices for yourself. They're no longer yours. And so it happens piece by piece with this mental control, this dominance that's happening. The other thing that would happen a lot that kind of kept me in line is I would witness traffickers abuse other women in the home. And so that was kind of their way of saying, like, stay in line or this will happen to you. I remember one of my first weeks there, one of the other women in the home being kicked out of the home with no shoes, no belongings, no identification, no money, and just beating on the door, begging and pleading with him. And I remember that because it switched in my brain of like, oh, don't make him mad. And so you learn to do what you're told, to fall in line, because there's consequences if you don't. And those repercussions are either physical, psychological, mental, sexual, you know, all the things. And so on top of that, you're being love bombed on a daily basis of like, oh my gosh, you're so amazing. You're so beautiful. Look at all the money you made. Like, I care about you. And with my traffickers, specifically, another thing that they would do is they would take us to like Gucci, Guess by Marciano, Louis Vuitton. They would shut the store down for the day and buy us whatever we wanted, of course, with the money that we earned, right? And so that was another way that they would love bomb us and show us how much they cared about us, right? And nobody else is going to buy you a Louis Vuitton bag like this. And so I worked in a very high-end realm of human trafficking, which is one form of it, because if you see a girl pulling up in, you know, a Range Rover with red bottoms, you're never going to think that this girl's being trafficked. And that's one of the misconceptions is like, she's well-dressed, her hair is done, she's tan, she's beautiful, all of the things. And nobody is going to look at her pulling up at a restaurant and think that this girl is being trafficked. And so that's a huge misconception. I think a lot of times people think that it's just women walking on the street or, which sometimes it is. And sometimes people are being trafficked in that way. And a lot of times they are, but there are so many different levels to trafficking and so many different ways that it can look. And so I really encourage people to get involved, and the more involved they get, the more they start to understand the different ways that trafficking can look. But I think the piece of leaving is so hard because you get so bonded with your trafficker, and you get so beaten down and you start to believe everything that they're telling you because that's the only voice that you're hearing. And so when you're being told no one else loves you, this is all you'll ever be good for, your family will never understand, you know, and then there's the intimidation of not wanting your family to be hurt or involved in any way. And so it isolates you. You're isolated, and that's the only thing you hear. And it's hard to leave when that's the case.
Me and Michelle did a episode on domestic violence, and what you're talking about, her and I both experienced that as well. And when you talk about, you actually start believing what they say about you, rings so true. And even though we talked about this, Michelle, where people saw the things that we were going through and people even like stopped talking to us, it costed us friendships and relationships because we were believing the lies. So I know what that feels like. It's like, you don't understand, and people don't understand why you stay.
No, they don't.
There is this fear that people don't understand. Like, why don't you just leave? Well, yeah. Great question.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I
Yeah.
did leave like 6 times and I went back.
And I can tell you, one time I did successfully leave and was in my friend's car, and he found me at a gas station and chased the vehicle down the road, beating on the window and trying to pull me out of the car. And so it's not that women don't leave, it's that they don't feel like they're really going to have the support or be successful if they get away. And so that kind of goes into a little bit of what I do now and making sure that women do have a safe place to go.
Yeah.
I love
I
that.
remember this one instance when we were driving down the road, and this just goes back to the control piece, where I had to hide birth control pills. And when he found birth control pills, he threw them out the window. And I mean, so just this control piece of how you had to hide the things you were doing because they wanted absolute control of your life. And I remember going to the store, and I think I remember sharing this. If I wasn't home when he would call, there was this fear, because if he called while I was at this grocery store, then I had to explain where I was at.
Yeah.
Yes. And so
you're obviously having sex with somebody else. That's what you were doing. Like, really?
And the threats and stuff.
I know.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to ask Mandy, how did you deal with that when you had a baby and you were in that situation? Did you bring your son with you, or was he left somewhere else, or how did that work out?
Yeah, so I actually had my son with me for the first 4 years that I was being trafficked. And that was another piece of the control, right? Like, I went to work, he hired the babysitters. And so there was at no point where I could leave without my son. And so when I did finally successfully make it out with my son, I called my mom, and I remember telling my mom, like, I just need you to take him. Like, I don't know what's going to happen with me, but like, I need you to take him. And I remember driving, through the night to get him safely to my mom. And that was one of the hardest.
Yeah.
Because I knew that it was going to be a long time before I had him with me and in my custody again. And for a long time, I felt like that was the most selfish thing, that I chose to stay and I got my son out, and why didn't I get out with, and what I came to realize in my recovery was that that was actually one of the most selfless things that I could have done as a mother, was to make sure that I got him out of that environment safely. And got him to a place where I knew he was loved and cared for. And so then my mom actually kept him for 4 years. And, by the time he was 8, I was starting to go into my liver failure and make it out of everything. And I remember when I was finally getting out at this point, like, my body and my mind, and I'm just absolutely wrecked. And I remember my mom bringing him into the ICU and him just saying, like, "Mommy, why is your skin orange?" My liver was failing, and I'll never forget that. But I know that I saved him in getting him out. And so, he's running around here right now, but he's 18 now. And so we've done a lot of healing over the years, individually and together. And I've been fully transparent with him about the things that happened early on. Cause a lot of it he doesn't remember. And I know that that's his trauma too. Yes. And so there's a piece of that as a mom that you carry.
Yeah.
We've talked about that a lot on this show. And I've had a lot of shame and guilt around what my son had to witness in my relationship that I had, because he was young. He was, I think 1st grade to maybe 6th grade or 4th grade or 5th grade, something like that. And I've apologized to him several times. And I just said, if you need to, let me have it, and I'll just sit and listen. If you need to just tell me everything that I did wrong, and if you want to just explode, go for it. I will not say anything. I will not be upset. I will take it. And he said, I don't need to do that, Mom. I don't blame you. And then I just saw him at Christmas, and he's almost 30 now. And he said to me on the way to the airport, which out of the blue, he goes, "Hey, Mom, just want to let you know that anytime I talk about you, I say such wonderful things about you, and how you did the best you could. And I was not an easy kid to raise." And I think, and the way to the airport when I was dropping him off, I think he thought I needed to hear that. So I just thought, isn't that, I mean, it's just the way it works. So it's rough, and I get it.
Yeah. I think we did talk about that recently, and a recent trip, I could hear my son saying things that I don't think he was saying, meaning anything, but I could hear his childhood experiences coming out, and I just had to like sit back and not take things personal and just go, this is his perspective and his experience, and I just have to let it be. I can't take things personal. And so that was a great, we just have to, and because it is their trauma. It's their experience of what you went through that they experienced as we were going through our own stuff. So
I would love to talk about the Refinery for Change. Did you have something else, Terry, before that?
No, that was the next thing. I wanted to hear about the Refinery.
Yeah, tell us about it and how people can get involved, or that would be great.
Absolutely. So I have been working in mental health and addiction coaching for the last 5 years. I just have such a heart for going back into the fire. I know what I went through, and I know what it felt like when there was no one there, and I know what it felt like when there was someone there, and that can make the world of difference in somebody's recovery. And so this past year, my husband and I launched our company called the Refinery for Change. And so we are a recovery company where we offer individual sessions, we offer group sessions, we do coaching sessions, life skills sessions, and therapy sessions. And so these are for individuals who are all walks of life that are wanting to get sober from any type of substances. We help provide them resources. We help provide them all the recovery resources of detox, sober living, all of those things. But we also provide housing resources and assistance as well. And so we have a website called therefineryforchange.com. We have some incredible coaches that come alongside individuals and just love them where they're at. A lot of what we're doing with this is psychoeducational. We're teaching them about their experiences in the form of trauma-informed care, like you mentioned, Terry, and how those things have affected them, how they've led to their addiction, and how to overcome them. And then we work with them on their future goals of how can we move forward, right? And so what are the goals that we have in the next 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, and how do we achieve those goals? And so this last year, we served around 200 people. And it was absolutely amazing. That was our first year, and we had no idea how it was going to go. And so we were just so excited at the end of the year to really be able to see those numbers. And I think it's just been such a blessing. The rate of relapse and people going back is really high, but when you see people succeeding and you see them getting it and they're hitting their milestones and they're checking off their goals, there is just something that it does to your heart and soul. And so we are just so blessed that we get to come alongside other people in recovery. And then in addition to what I do with launching my own company, the Refinery for Change, I am also the program director for Safe Places for Women. And Safe Places for Women is an anti-trafficking organization. We have a house and we house survivors that are coming out of trafficking situations. The house that we have currently is a transitional living house. And so we get referrals from all over the place. We actually have a girl coming in from out of state today. And so there's lots of ways to get plugged in either with the Refinery or Safe Places. And Safe Places website is safeplacesforwomen.org. And so they have a lot of volunteer opportunities right now. They just launched an outreach sector. And so they're getting people on those outreach walks down on Colfax Avenue and going to meet women on the streets and in the clubs and just loving on them and letting them know that, hey, Jesus loves you and we want to pray for you. And so they've got a great ministry, and I'm so thankful I get to partner with them and come alongside them. And kind of how they work interchangeably is the Refinery also runs and facilitates groups for Safe Places for Women. And so my coaches come in and they run groups for the women and help them in their recovery journey. And so that's just such a gift for me. And I'm thankful that I get to wake up every single day doing what I love and watching other people change their lives.
I love that.
I love it.
Yes, absolutely. It's something too, Terry. That's something you should be doing.
I was just going to tell her we need to chat.
You definitely.
I wasn't going to do it online here, but
hey,
the Refinery's new, Mandy. We need to chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I would love to get involved.
Absolutely. We would love for people to get involved in any way that they can. And kind of some goals for both the Refinery and Safe Places this year is we're hoping to launch more houses. And so we're going to need more people to come alongside and support us with that.
I'm willing.
Yes. And we want to save more women. We want more women to reclaim their lives.
Me too.
And my husband, he owns a motorcycle shop in Inglewood. And so he works a lot with the local homeless. And so he does a lot of skills groups, helping them find new jobs, new careers, and different things like that out of his motorcycle shop. And so that's kind of been another part of the ministry. That's been amazing. And so he works with a lot of the men, and then I work with a lot of the women. And so we just keep it a little bit more gender specific. So that way we can help really focus in on their trauma and how to best support them.
This is the kind of stuff we need in the world. This is the kind of people we need in the world to be providing services and support and resources. What both of you guys do, Terry and Mandy, what both of you guys do is so needed. So I just appreciate what you're up to. And I'm in Dallas, so I'm not in Colorado to be able to be a part of it, or I'd be there to help too. I would love it. But
I am so thankful, Mandy, that we connected. I'm always watching you on Facebook. So the Refinery is new. I was curious about what you were doing with that. And so I'm so glad that you came on and shared more of that. But yeah.
We'll have the links. We'll have the links to both of those that she mentioned in the show notes here. I'm excited about that. And Mandy, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story. And I know for a fact that there will be people that listen to this that will make a difference in their lives. I know for a fact.
Absolutely. As one that received your permission, I was able to give myself permission, because I sometimes you have to believe you have to hold on to somebody else's hope and courage, because I needed that when she showed up on that stage that day, and I held on to it. And 6 years later, here I am. But I needed someone to believe in. And I believed in God, of course, but I believe he uses people. And in that moment, that day, it was you he used. And so I thank you. I can never thank you enough. Every time I see you, I tell you that. But
yes, thank you so much. And I think it's also just a testament of when God calls us to do something, he's looking for our yes. And so, there's a scripture in Isaiah of here I am, send me. And so it's God gets my yes. If you're asking me to go, and the story is not about me, but it's about what God can do through our stories. And so I just thank you for always sharing that with me, because it takes courage for us to do what we do. But I think it's also a level of obedience and discipline of listening to God and what he's asking from us.
100%.
Yes. Well, thanks so much for coming. Again, the links to both the Refinery and Safe Places for Women, both of those are going to be the links to both of those will be in the show notes. And if you want to leave a comment, share this out with somebody that may need to hear this, hear Mandy's story, or want to be involved somehow, if you're in the Colorado area, that would be great. And Mandy, thanks so much for coming. We really appreciate you so much.
Of course. Thank you, ladies, so much for having me today.
Thank you for everything you do.